G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Today we're talking about all those risky and injured players and where should you draft them. Let's go!
Jordan open. Chicago with the lead. Bryant to Shaq.
Not a game. We talking about practice.
LeBron James with no regard for human life. Anything's possible!
Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Murray for three. Wow! Unbelievable. Making it rain in New York. We the North are now we the champions.
Not the destination, it's the journey. Mamba out.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at BallBoysNBA and on Instagram at BallBoys Fantasy Basketball. Today we are going to be talking about the quote-unquote risky players in your drafts, players who are either labeled injury-prone, have had a history of injuries in the past, or are currently injured at the moment, and basically where I think that they should be targeted in your draft, so then you can decide if they're going too early or too late, and hopefully, and again, just my general attitude towards drafting these risky players and what I'm doing in drafts and how I'm approaching them. Because sometimes it can lead to lots of really good value, and sometimes it can be too much risk to take on and it can derail your season. So it is a tricky thing to navigate. I'm recording this on Wednesday, the 5th of October. If there is any major injuries or anything that happens between now and when I release this podcast, I will probably cut in another edit to this one as well. So, hopefully nothing happens between now and then and we have a good run of health and there's no more injuries to start the season. But this is where we are going to be talking about these guys. Before we get started, if you haven't already, go over to ballboysnba.com and subscribe for our season draft guide and get all of my rankings and all of the extra Q&A podcasts, which will be happening throughout the normal season. Just $10 to sign up for that one for the whole year. If you sign up, don't cancel the subscription. You will lose your access to the season guide. So once the season is over, I'll be canceling all subscriptions. So don't worry about getting charged again. $10 the whole season, and you get all of my rankings and extra podcasts throughout the season. So now that that's out of the way, let's get stuck into the first player. Now, I wasn't even going to put this guy on here, but I thought I should talk about him. Damian Lillard is the first guy we'll talk about. To me, abdominal surgery last year, missed the majority of the season, was pretty bad before then. By all reports, he's good, healthy, ready to go. The moves that the Portland Trail Blazers made in the offseason make me think that he's doing well. I'm taking him at his word that he's feeling better than ever. I do really think that we're going to see Damian Lillard that we are used to seeing. Maybe after the first few weeks, he might be a little bit rusty to start the year, but he's typically a punt field goal percentage guy anyway, so he's kind of like the only guy in the first round that when I'm drafting him, I'm automatically just going into a punt field goal percentage build. But yeah, I think that he's a first round guy, top 13 at least. I think there's a pretty clear top 13 players. So for me, not worried about Damian Lillard at all. I'm expecting him to sort of be the guy, the normal Dame that we've been accustomed to seeing. So for me, not too concerned about him. Kyrie Irving is another guy, a bit of a hot name in terms of risky players, maybe the poster boy for this kind of topic. For me, I'm getting Kyrie in a few leagues. I've got him in the Locked On Fantasy Basketball at pick 17. I'm happy to take him as high as 14 in drafts. I think there's a clear top 13 for me. Some of those late guys, Karl Anthony Towns, Tyrese Halliburton, Damian Lillard, Trae Young, LaMelo Ball, those kind of guys going towards the back end of the first round, I would have in front of Kyrie. But as soon as all those guys are off the board, Kyrie Irving is the next guy that I'm taking. He has top 5 upside per game in fantasy basketball. He hasn't had an injury really for the last 12 months, 18 months. The vaccination stuff is all sorted. He's not going to be restricted in any arena. Even Toronto has lifted their sort of vaccination mandate over there for NBA athletes. So he's fine on that front. It is Kyrie. He's going to maybe miss some games with some weird, personal things, but the second round is full of injury-prone, risky players. There's him, Anthony Dayvis, Kawhi Leonard, Jimmy Butler. You've got Fred VanVleet and those kind of guys. A lot of them, Paul George, some people consider injury prone. There's a lot of guys, LeBron James is turning 38. There's just a lot of risk in this second round. So for me, why not take the guy that has the highest upside of that entire group, the guy who's not injured right now? He's younger than a few of those guys. I just think that Kyrie Irving is the best bet, the best gamble to take in that second round, assuming you've gone someone pretty safe in the first round. So for me, I've been pairing him with Jason Tatum a lot. I think that's an awesome start to my draft, especially if you're going to go with like a punt blocks kind of a build, which I'm really liking this year. So Kyrie Irving to me is someone that I'm happy to take after the big 13 off the board. Really excited to see what he does this season. I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to see 60, 65 games from Kyrie Irving this season, which for me is pretty close to league average. Crossing my fingers that that's the case, because I think he's going to be someone who... He was winning a lot of people their fantasy basketball playoffs last year. Yeah, he might have stung you in terms of getting to the playoffs, but those who were maybe able to get him off the waiver wire whilst he was out, or guys who were able to still make the playoffs with him on the roster, he was a game changer down the end, because he was maybe a top 3 guy in that stretch. So really, really good fantasy player, and someone who I have no issues drafting in the second round. The next guy, again, another second round guy, Anthony Dayvis, is someone who... Obviously, the day to Dayvis tag is legitimate. He's missed a lot of time. He gets little injuries all the time, always seems banged up, but this guy has been a perennial first-ranked player in fantasy basketball in the past. The free throw percentage is really the killer here. He's also dropped a little bit in rebounds. The scoring has dried up from his sort of peak seasons. So for me, I don't necessarily think he has the same upside as Kyrie Irving. Although in a punt free throw percentage build, it could be considered equal. So for me, if you're happy to punt free throw percentage, and if you've got a guy like Luka or Giannis, easily happy to pair him with one of those guys as my second pick. If I'm not as keen to punt free throws, or I'm not too sure yet, he's kind of like a late second guy for me in that case. But for me, I still think that the upside is there compared to other players like a Fred VanVleet, even a Kawhi Leonard. I'd rather take Dayvis over Kawhi. I'd rather take, Dayvis and LeBron are pretty close to me, depending on how much you value blocks. Blocks are just going to be so hard to find in abundance this season. Dayvis is one of the few guys that can do that and still contribute in scoring. Steals are decent. The assist from a big is nice as well. So for me, Anthony Dayvis still has the amount of upside that you need to take someone as risky as he does in the second round. So I'm kind of reading these guys off in a order in which I'd be happy to draft them in, but obviously there are different asterisks depending on your team build. But for me, Anthony Dayvis is someone I'd consider after Kyrie Irving, but before a lot of those other guys that are a bit more risky. The next guy on the board here that I'll talk about is Paul George. Paul George is someone who... He had an elbow injury last year. He's obviously had fractured legs in the past, and a few little nicks and bruises here, but nothing really chronic as far as I'm aware for Paul George. I'm not as concerned as I am with him compared to Kawhi Leonard, his teammate. Now, obviously, he doesn't have the same upside as Kawhi, and he might still get rested simply because that Clippers team is super duper deep. So for Paul George, I'm not as worried about him as some of those other guys. So again, he's a really good guy in the second round, especially if I'm punting field goal percentage or blocks or both. He's going to give me great threes, great steals, good assists from a power forward eligible player. The free throw percentage is awesome. So for me, he's sort of a middle to late second round option in a punt field goal percentage kind of a build. And he might rest some back-to-backs here and there, but I'm not overly concerned about his riskiness compared to maybe someone else. I kind of see his level of risk below that of an Anthony Dayvis and a Kawhi Leonard, maybe higher than that of a Devin Booker, who's going in the second round as well, who seems to be like a really safe option in that area. Perhaps similar to that of a LeBron James, like that kind of a level of risk, you could call it. Just the fact that the team is so deep and they do have a lot of back-to-backs this season. Maybe he rests a few more. But I do expect him to get to 65 sort of games this season, which, again, is pretty bang on league average. So, happy to take him in the second round. The next guy we're going to touch on here, which I almost didn't put him on here, but Fred VanVleet is another guy who just because of the minutes he plays in Toronto, is a bit of an injury-prone guy. He's had a few knee issues in the past. I have liked me some Fred VanVleet in the past, and I still do on a per-game basis, especially when you're punting field goal percentage. I just find myself gravitating away from him a lot come drafts this season, so I kind of see him more as like an end of the second, early third round guy instead of like the second round lock that I initially thought he was. I am just a little bit worried about his availability and the minutes that Nick Nurse pushes him to play. The knees make me just a little bit nervous. Either the minutes come down and his value drops a little bit, or the minutes stay up high and the risk is still there come your fantasy playoffs. So either way, I'm not super happy about it. And I just find myself passing Fred VanVleet in order to get someone I feel a little bit safer a lot of the time in drafts. I don't think his ceiling is insanely high like these other guys to warrant maybe a pick in the second round. So I'm probably more keen to get him in the third round than I am in the second, like I was initially in the preseason. But just I find myself, now that I'm doing more and more drafts this year, I just find myself wanting to pass over him more often than I initially thought. The next guy here, again, you could be considering him as a second-round guy, Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi's a really tricky one. He's a really tricky one because it really depends on your league and your format. In Roto leagues, I would have him right behind Kyrie Irving. I think that he is someone who, in a Roto league, really shines in that format. You don't have to worry about his terrible playoff schedule, which is something I should have mentioned with Paul George. I really don't like their playoff schedule this year. They've got a couple of back-to-backs, a couple of 2-game weeks, and it's really rough. It's really rough. Make sure you look at your playoff schedule and when it is, because if you end in, I think it's March 26th or March 19th, I'm pretty sure that they've got 8 or 9 games in the playoffs, both of those playoff series. And I think in both series, there's a couple of back-to-backs in each of those weeks. So he might even play a couple of weeks where he's got 2-game weeks in consecutive weeks in those playoff settings. So double-check your playoffs, double-check your roster and your schedule for those playoffs. And Kawhi Leonard, for me, is someone who is starting to fade back towards the third round, sort of end of the second, start of the third. If I've got someone like a Jokic, I'm pretty happy to take the swing if I get him on the turn and someone else I feel safer with. He's a top 10 guy in 9 category leagues. Little bit harder to form a punt strategy around, but you can punt blocks with Jokic and Kawhi and then get someone a bit safer to pair alongside him. I probably still prefer him over the next guy I'm going to talk about, although I could be convinced otherwise. I just think that outside of the restings, I think I feel a little bit safer from him getting an injury compared to the guy I'm going to speak about next, Jimmy Butler, spoiler alert. And his upside is just that little bit higher. I think he's still going to be the guy, the threes that he contributes, the steals are awesome. He's probably going to score more, if not the same amount of points. And the turnovers are probably a bit better. So Kawhi, to me, end of the second, start of the third. I did pass over him in our Fantasy Pro 20 team league draft, and I drafted Drew Holiday instead. Now, I would have drafted Kawhi if it was a standard 12-team league. I think this was at pick 33. The only reason I didn't draft Kawhi at that spot is because it's a five player starting roster. So if you've got someone like Kawhi taking up 20% of your starting roster spots, that's a lot of value missing for 15 games of the year in that type of a format. But when it's the one of 10, it's a different story. Okay, you can handle it a lot better. So for me, in those deeper formats or those formats where you've got fewer starters, he suffers a lot more. But in standard 10 player starters, 12-team leagues, I think that he is that sort of back end of the second round, early third for me. Jimmy Butler, the guy I mentioned before, kind of a similar story to Kawhi, very similar in value. I don't think I'm not taking him in the second round. He's definitely a third round guy for me, and only if I've got a team where I haven't mentioned any of the players that I've already talked about. So I want to have a really healthy team before I select Jimmy Butler. He can be a guy that maybe is a top 20 guy, great in both percentages, steals and assists are nice. He's not going to give you threes. Rebounds and points are okay as well. So he's good. I just can't trust him. I just can't trust him and his body, and the Heat have always been taking it easy on him. I think Tyler Hero is going to step up again this year. Bam, I think, is going to step up this year. So I can just see a slight step back. He's a bit older than some of these other guys we've talked about. So for me, just a third-round guy. I wouldn't let him fall outside sort of the top 35, top 40, though. I think in that situation, you're getting really, really good value, and it's a good swing. But I wouldn't mind if you pass on him even in the late 20s to go with some other guys that you feel a bit safer in, especially if you've got a riskier guy like a Kyrie or like a Kawhi, Anthony Davis, all those kind of types. I wouldn't really want to pair him in those kind of teams. But if you've gone safe, say you've gone Tatum and then a Devin Booker, then the Jimmy Butler, I think, is fine to draft in the third round in a team like that. So that's sort of where he lands for me. Next sort of guy, again, we're moving down the draft board and where I sort of rank players. Kristaps Porzingis is another favorite injury-prone, risky guy. We know he's an awesome fantasy player. Again, kind of similar to Jimmy Butler, top 20 potential. The blocks, especially this season, hard to find, man. They're hard to get. There's an argument you could even take Kristaps ahead of a player like Jimmy Butler. I could definitely listen to that argument. If you need those blocks, if you want a guy with good blocks and free throw percentage, in our categorical scarcity podcast, we talked about there was only 8 players in the entire NBA last year that put up 1 block and positive contributions to free throw percentage. And Kristaps puts up 1.6 blocks per game, plus he shoots threes and scores 20 points. So it's just, he's called the unicorn in the NBA. He's a unicorn in fantasy basketball. There's not many other players that do what he does. So for me, the upside is warranting drafting him in the sort of late third, early fourth. So in the 30s, I think he's fine to go, especially if you need those blocks. Again, similar to Jimmy Butler, I would want a healthy team beforehand if I'm drafting him in the third. If I've got someone like a Kyrie, if I've got someone like an Anthony Davis, I'd probably want to wait till the fourth in the 40s. And even then, it's still risky to pair 2 of those guys on the same team. The upside is there, and it could be an awesome move. It's just, something you've got to weigh up, because if you don't need those blocks, well, then he's not as valuable. So it's something you've got to weigh up, whether you try and chase that, add that risk to your team. It could really pay off. Blocks are going to be very hard to come by this season, and he could win you that category most weeks on his own back. But again, the injury proneness is legitimate, I think. We haven't seen him play with Bradley Beal in Washington. So there's a little bit of volatility there compared to Jimmy Butler, who's on the same team with the same guys. We kind of know what he's going to do. Kristaps is a little bit more volatile with his value, so I've popped him behind him on this list, but I could listen to the argument where you take him ahead of Jimmy Butler if you need those blocks. So he, again, in the 30s is sort of where I'd be happy to pull the trigger if I'm already pretty healthy. Myles Turner is the next one. Again, blocks, the theme of this one here. He's an elite shot blocker. I always drop him down a little bit in my rankings just because when you block 3 blocks per game or 2.8 or whatever he did last season, even if you go down a couple, half a block per game, it's still elite, but it's a lot of his value gone. So high variance in that low counting stat. He's obviously been up in a lot of trade rumors. I personally don't think he's going to be on the Pacers after the deadline. I think Indiana will be trading him. He's a free agent at the end of the season, so they're going to want to get something from him. They're floating his name out there. They're saying they're going to take 2 first-rounders to move him. That might become 1 first-rounder by the trade deadline. I think he's gone from the Pacers. So there's a little bit of risk that his value drops on a new team. However, I still think wherever he goes, he's going to be blocking shots. He's going to be a positive contributor in that category. He still will start, I would assume, no matter where he is traded. So I don't think his value will completely evaporate. It just might not be as high as it is right now. So for me, I'm still happy to try and take him sort of in that 4th round. I think that's a fine place, sort of 35 to 45, I think is a perfectly fine spot to draft him. Like we said before, blocks are hard to find. He's a good free throw percentage shooter. Won't score like Porzingis. Won't get as many threes like Porzingis. So his per game upside isn't as high as Kristaps. But, he is, I guess he's also a little bit injury prone. For some reason, I feel like Kristaps is more injury prone, but you could argue the fact that they one could play more games than the other. So that is still there as well. So for me, I've got him a little bit behind Kristaps just because of the added element of the trade scenario and the murkiness there. But again, I still think he's going to be a good shot blocker no matter where he goes. So yeah, happy to take him sort of close to pick 40 would be about right for me. And then we're going to finish this little run of blocks, guys, with Evan Mobley. Just wanted to quickly mention him. He has rolled his ankle this preseason. They say he's going to miss 1 to 2 weeks. I think he should be right for opening night. So this, to me, doesn't affect how I view his value to me. I see him very similar to Kristaps, Turner, and those kind of guys in that kind of a round. Maybe he doesn't have the upside, although maybe he does. I could very easily hear the argument of taking Mobley ahead of those two guys that I just mentioned in Turner and Porzingis as your blocks guy. Just be aware of the free throw percentage. I wouldn't be comfortable projecting that that's going to improve. He wasn't a great free throw percentage in college. He wasn't in his first year in the NBA. So be ready for it to be a poor free throw guy. So better in a punt free throw build. I'm expecting field goal percentage to come up. I'm expecting steals to come up and points to rise a little bit. The Mitchell trade does limit his absolute peak ceiling, but I do still think that he's got a little bit of upside from his season last year. And again, blocks, if you want him, you're going to have to go early. And so for me, he's right in that mix, sort of the late 30s, early 40s for me, if you want a player who's a little bit safer than those other guys, in my opinion. Continuing along, back into some guards here. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has sprained his MCL. They're saying that, he's touch and go. They haven't committed to whether or not he's going to be playing in the season opener. I expect that he might miss maybe the first week of the season, but then should be back pretty soon after that. A lot of people before the injury were worried about tanking. This injury only further cements people's opinion. I'm not as concerned, but the Chet injury does have me a little bit more down on him than before. I just think that the Thunder won't be as good. Not the best thing starting off with an injury and missing training camp. However, he's an awesome player. I really like Shai. I think he's a great fantasy player. So for me, especially in like a punt threes team, I think that he is someone that can really, really be a difference maker. So I'm happy to take him sort of in the 40s. Similar kind of range to the guy that I'm going to talk about next in Khris Middleton. I'm not super concerned about this injury affecting him throughout the entire season. That just combined with his shutdown risk, which I'm less concerned about. But if your playoffs go into April, they go deeper into the season, then I would definitely knock him down maybe a round. But if your playoffs end on March 19, even March 26, so the end of March there, I'd be happy to take him sort of mid to high 40s would be about where I've got him, which I think is a bit of value. I think he was ranked 58th last time I checked on Yahoo. So I think there's a good bit of value there with Shai if you can get him in those 40s zone. And then, you miss your first week, but that's fine. It's only 1 week, and I think that first week is usually a bit weird anyway. So Shai, to me, is definitely fine in the 40s, as is Khris Middleton. Again, shoulder injury. Sorry, no, not a shoulder injury. Wrist injury, I think it is. Not really concerned. Might miss a week or two, but should be back and doing his thing. Pretty safe guy. Upside, not as high as Shai. You don't necessarily have the risk of the shutdown like you do Shai. I personally would go SGA ahead of Khris Middleton just because of that upside and because I think he's just a better player. And a lot of my leagues end in March as well. So for me, I'm going Shai over Khris Middleton, but very similar kind of a zone for both of those guys, in my opinion. Zion Williamson. Now, I swing to and fro with Zion and my thoughts on him. I tell you what, he looks bloody good, doesn't he? He looks fit. He looks strong. He's lost a lot of weight, and he could be really good this year. Let's not get that twisted. I think he's an amazing player. I think he could be something super special in this league. I've been on the record saying that I'm down on him when it comes to a fantasy point of view. I'm coming around to drafting him in the 3rd or 4th round if I started with Luka Doncic and I'm punting free throws. I still don't really see the value in drafting him any higher than the 4th round if I started with someone like a Giannis and then I've got an Embiid on my team and then I've got someone like Sabonis. I don't see the value on stacking all of that field goal percentage in your team and just being so astronomically better than every other team in your league. I just think that that's it's a bit overkill, and a lot of his value is tied up in that field goal percentage. Yes, he's going to score really well, and points is something that is hard to find, but I think I'd rather draft someone like a Ja Morant and get a bigger boost to my assists in that kind of a build. Or just get someone who's a good point scorer that maybe just does something else and doesn't have the injury risk like a Zion does. But in that Luka build, I think when you need that field goal percentage, it does make a lot more sense for me. So I'm happy to take him in the third round with that kind of a build. But anyone else, like if I started with Giannis, he's probably a fourth rounder for me. Just don't see the need to stack up so much field goal percentage on my team, especially when you can get guys like Clint Capella, Mitch Robinson, Jakob Poeltl. You can get those big field goal percentage boosters later in your draft if you're not caring about free throw percentage. It's not a very hard category to find late in drafts throughout the middle rounds. So for me, the value of his field goal percentage in that kind of a team doesn't make it as worthwhile. In saying that, though, yeah, I think the risk is still there. They'll take it easy on him, but the fact that he's looking so trim and he's looking like shredded Zion, it does ease my mind a little bit. But I just don't think we should throw it away and start drafting him in the second round. I think that's getting a bit too excited. I think that, drafting him on the turn of the second and third round, it's just a bit too optimistic in my point of view, and you could really get stung there. But God, he looks good, and it could be this is one of those ones where the risk could really pay off, especially if those defensive stats come. I don't think that they will, but if they do, he could really, really blow up. It's the defensive stats. We haven't really seen it yet. We saw it in college. I'm not ready to say that they will come, but if they do, geez, it could be something special. So, yeah, I'm to and fro with my opinions on Zion, but at the moment I still have him as like a third round in a Luka team, fourth round in a Giannis team, or if you've got an Anthony Dayvis or something like that, I still want him in the fourth round because, again, that's just too much injury risk on my team. So Luka's team, and you've gone healthy in your second round, third round, I think is fine. Jamal Murray is the next guy we're going to talk about here. Coming off an ACL, a lot of people get really worried about Jamal. He started in a preseason game. Yeah, he was rusty, and I expect him to be rusty to start the season, but I'm not worried about Jamal Murray at all. He could easily be a top 50 guy. He was a top 40 guy before his injury. So I'm happy to take him anywhere inside the top 60, I think is fine. I'm sorry, not anywhere inside the top 60, but, around that 55 to 60 mark, I think is fine. I think by the time we're 2 months into the season, he'll be cooking and doing top 45 numbers. Great free throw percentage, should score about 20 points a night, 5 assists, 4 rebounds, a steal, 2.5, 3 threes a game. I think he'll be really good. I think he'll be really solid, so I'm happy to take him there. Very similar story to Ben Simmons, the next guy we're going to be talking about. A lot of people are off on Simmons. They say he's weak, he bitches and he moans, but I think when it comes to fantasy basketball, he is an awesome, awesome fantasy basketball player. Rebounds, steals, field goal percentage. He might be blocking some more shots this year if he plays a bit more center. Assists are nice. Yes, he won't hit threes. Yes, he won't score that much, but there are other categories, guys. He's one of the most unique fantasy contributors in the game, and when you can get a guy outside the top 50, top 60, who can be elite in several categories, field goal percentage, assists and steals, and still provide you good rebounds and blocks for a point guard player, in those punt builds and those punt threes, punt free throw builds, that is absolute gold. So I'm not really too worried about his back injury. Maybe he gets some rest throughout the season depending on how the Nets are going, but to me, I'm not too concerned about Ben Simmons. I think he's playing in preseason, which is a great sign. He's appearing a lot of media things, which is good. He's going on podcasts and all this sort of stuff, talking about his issues and the dramas and stuff like that. So, me, those are all really good signs. I've typically been quite high on Ben Simmons, so maybe, I don't know, this is an optimist talking, but I do like him. I'm, again, similar to Jamal Murray, happy to take him around that 60 mark, and I think he's going a bit later than that in draft, so there's some good value there. We'll go through these next guys a little bit quicker. Klay Thompson, injuries should all be okay. He's sitting out on a few preseason games, but I think he will play a little bit next week. I've recently drafted him in the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Ball. I think I got him at pick 77, 78. So I think that was fine for me. I did need his points. I drafted Chris Paul a little bit earlier, so I was a bit of a hole in points, so I needed a guy who's going to give me 20 a night. Klay does that. He was top 70 last year, although I don't really want to draft him top 70. I think that would be maybe his ceiling. I'd want a little bit of a discount because I think he will rest some back-to-backs. Hopefully, I'm optimistic that the back-to-backs resting will be not a thing come fantasy playoffs. Maybe it might be something that they do to start the season, getting him back into shape and those kind of things. But I think that the second half of the year, maybe they'll ease off on that, just depending on how the Warriors are going. I think there's maybe a little bit too much talk about a championship hangover. I don't think they're going to just be playing their guys 25 a night, playing every second game. I think he'll still go out there and do his thing, so I'm not super concerned. Next guy here, Michael Porter Jr. I was never a big fan of MPJ to begin with. 2 injuries to his back. He had the injury before his draft. Injured again last season. The field goal percentage has always been a worry for me. He was elite in that in his year where he broke out. Never really believed that was going to continue at the level that it was. He'll be high 40s in my opinion, but it's just not enough to really catapult his value like it was that season. Jamal Murray is now back, so he's going back to the third offensive option. You've even got guys like Bones Highland stepping up. I don't believe he played with Aaron Gordon much before his injury last season. So, to me, I think he's maybe got top 50 to 60 upside. I'd want to add a bit of a discount at that. So, for me, I'm not really reaching and grabbing him before around pick 70. Pick 75 to 80, I would definitely consider him. I think he was available at pick 92 in the Locked On Fantasy Basketball. I definitely considered him there. I did take Klay Thompson the round before, so I didn't want to add too many of those risky guys. So I did actually pass him at pick 92, and I think I went Tyler Hero instead. So he was definitely in consideration for me, and if I had a bit more of a healthier list at that point, I would have taken him there at that point. But that's kind of the range that I'd be happy to draft him in. I think if you're reaching inside the top 60, top 70, I think it's a bit too early, and I don't know if the upside is all that much higher, and the downside I think is somewhat considerably there at that point. Kyle Lowry, older guy, personal issues last season, apparently still might be lingering this season. He was a top 55, top 60 guy last season. The Miami Heat's roster is pretty thin, in my opinion at least anyway, so I think he's still going to be needing to play decent minutes, probably close to 30 a night again. He should be, top 70 guy in my opinion. I'd probably happy to take him around pick 80, pick 75 to 80. If you need those assists, the upside really isn't there. So I understand fading him even a little bit later than this, but he's just going to be solid. I'm not too worried about his body breaking down. It's more just the regression and how much those personal issues impact him. Although I don't expect it to be a massive issue. It's just more how much does he get worse with his age is really just the only thing that I'm a bit concerned about with Kyle Lowry. Now we're going to talk about some of the bigger injuries. Robert Williams. I was all in on Robert Williams being a start of the third round kind of guy. Top 25 guy on my rankings. I loved me some Rob Williams, going with the punt point strategy in that scenario and just getting elite percentages, blocks, good rebounds, assists from my center. But it's not to be this season. The initial timeline was 6 to 8 weeks. It ballooned out to 8 to 12 weeks now, which basically puts him out for the first 2 to 3 months of the season. I expect he might be back in about December this season. Maybe towards Christmas would be my best guess. So it's a tough one. He's obviously had multiple injuries to his knees. This is a reoccurring injury that he got surgery on before the playoffs, came back probably too early, didn't rehab it properly over the summer break, and now he's getting another surgery again. So it's something that's reoccurring. It does make me nervous. So I probably would be okay to take him around the 9th round if it's going to be maybe one of my last starting roster spots just before I start to fill out my bench would be as early as I would go if I really needed the blocks. He's got super high upside. I trust the Celtics reporting more than I trust the Grizzlies reporting. Don't know if I trust the Celtics medical staff, but at least the way that they are reporting the injury news and the timelines, I trust from a fantasy point of view a bit more. So a bit more confidence that he will be back before the 2023 portion of the season. But yeah, it does swing him down a fair bit to me in my eyes. So, around pick 90 to 100 is about where I'd be happy to take the gamble on him. And again, if you don't need blocks, then you don't need Robert Williams. As simple as that. If you don't want blocks, then just completely ignore him because he's not going to provide enough value for that risk to be worth it. If you do need blocks, that's when you consider him. But if you don't need him, just write him off your board. The similar kind of story with the guy here, Jaren Jackson Jr. Similar kind of timeline as well. I think, like I said, I trust the Celtics reporting more than the Grizzlies. I kind of expect them to be back around a similar time. So, yeah, maybe a round later than Robert Williams. 9th at the earliest. Again, similar if you really need those blocks and he fits your build. I'd be happy to take that. If you're desperate for a center, which I know sometimes can be the case, then you can go for him there. He does provide a little bit different things to Robert. At least he provides some threes and free throw percentage, better scoring. So there is a little bit more. There's a few more builds that he suits than Robert Williams. Ideally, you're getting him after pick 100, round 10, maybe as your last starting roster sort of spot. Into the bench is amazing. If you can get him as like your first bench player in the draft, then I think that's awesome. Although I think savvy fantasy drafters will get him before then. So at earliest I would go would be round 9. That would be about as well as I go. And it's a similar kind of story. If you really need the blocks, his value is much more improved. Last couple of guys, Gordon Hayward. Around pick 100 is about where I'd have him. He should provide about top 70 numbers, in my opinion. I don't think he's got the top 50 upside anymore. I think he's just gotten past it. Yes, Miles Bridges is not there, but I just don't think it's going to be Gordon Hayward that really steps up. He's just, he could for stretches, but I just don't see him doing that for the entire season. I can't trust him at all. So for me, after pick 100, I grab him, hope he can give me top 70 numbers for at least a little while. If he gets injured, it's not the end of the world. So for me, that's about where he is. Just pretty solid across the board, not super valuable in any one category as well. Also kind of hurts him in head-to-head builds. And then the last one here is Lonzo Ball. It sucks, man. I'm a big Lonzo Ball fan as a player in the NBA, as a fantasy guy. Our podcast is called The Bloody Ball Boys. I love me the Ball brothers. It just sucks the way that they've handled this injury. Just the rehab side, I think, is so bizarre. I really wouldn't be drafting Lonzo outside of my last pick or two. So the last couple of rounds, maybe. If there's really not much upside on the board, sure, you could take Lonzo and then just grab someone else off the waiver wire after your draft. But there's some reports that he might not play this season. They're optimistic he's going to play, so I wouldn't expect him at all in 2022. Maybe January, February this season, All-Star break, maybe. If you've got multiple IR spots, sure, you can grab him. But if you've only got the one or two even, it just might not be worth drafting Lonzo at all this season. The reporting and what they're saying just sounds like it gets worse and worse every day. And so something that was supposed to take 6 to 8 weeks to now take 12 months, it's just not a good sign at all. And even when he is back, they're going to be really cautious with him, really slow with his return to minutes. So, yeah, for me, I'm fading Lonzo pretty hard now. Definitely just kind of like a last round flyer when there's really not much else left on the board. Sure, you can take him there. More so in a roto league as well. I think that's a bit better. But if you've got multiple IR spots, that's about where I'd have him. So that will do it today, guys. Let us know if you think there's anyone else that I've missed. I'm sure there might be someone I've forgotten. And again, if there is any updates, I probably would have already talked about it between now and then, but I'll update you guys along. Follow me on Twitter at BallBoysNBA. I will be tweeting out all my thoughts on injury-prone guys, draft thoughts, updating with my drafts. Head over to ballboysnba.com. Get yourself a season draft guide, and good luck with your drafts, guys. Laters.